Granddaughter refused to take care of grandfather. When he died, he taught her a lesson. When 86-year-old Ray fell ill, his granddaughter Macy was the only person who could take care of him. Not that he wanted to be a burden, but Ray had no other family left who could assist him. When Macy refused, he was deeply disappointed, in large part because he wanted to have family close by as he went through his final days. But he understood. Macy was young. It was hard to put her entire life on hold to care for an old man. Ray then checked himself into a hospice, where he passed away peacefully a few weeks later. Macy had no idea what her late grandfather Ray had planned for her. All she knew was that she needed to meet with the notary to discuss the inheritance he had apparently left her. More than the loss of her grandfather, Macy was certainly looking forward to finding out what her grandfather left her. But what the notary had ready for her was something that Macy would never expect. There was no money, or at least, not yet. The only thing the notary handed to her was a letter that Ray had told him to personally give to Macy. It was a letter that was of the greatest importance. When Macy opened the letter, it quickly became clear the lesson that Ray had spent his last few weeks planning. She was shocked. Macy had not had the easiest start to life. However, her grandfather Ray always did everything in his power to help his granddaughter and to make her life better in whatever way he could. Sadly, as an adult, she would not end up repaying the favor when it mattered most. When Macy was just a little girl of 5 years old, her parents passed away in a car accident one icy winter night. Her widowed grandfather Ray raised her, taking it upon himself to give Macy the best childhood and life he could, but the incident had left a deep imprint on the girl. She was a quiet child who grew into a numb and secluded young adult. There was seemingly nothing Ray could do to help her out of her shell. So when Macy was 16, she left home to go live with a then-boyfriend. Even after Macy moved out, Ray tried to check in on his granddaughter. She often ignored his calls, though, or was very short with her responses. It hurt Ray's heart to try to watch his only family member drift away from him, but he didn't know what to do. Ray kept asking if everything was okay with her life, but she would always avoid the question. He still always tried to take care of Macy however he could. Several years after Macy moved out, the day came that it was no longer Macy who needed Ray's help. Ray was getting older after all, so when the time came, the tables flipped on them. One day, Ray fell seriously ill, collapsing in the street. An ambulance was called, and Ray was taken to the hospital. The doctors managed to revive Ray, but Ray was definitely not out of danger. He had suffered a devastating stroke and was not the same man anymore. He needed a lot of help with basic day-to-day activities and would for the rest of his life. Although Ray had the money to hire a home nurse for the short term, he knew the money wouldn't last long. Even though he knew he likely wouldn't live for much longer, he didn't want to leave Macy with nothing when he died. So he reached out to the only family he had left to help him, Macy. Ray, however, already knew the answer he was likely to get, but still, he hoped that his granddaughter would want to spend time with him in his final days. Sadly, Macy did not surprise him with her response. When Ray asked if she would be able to come to see him, she informed him that she didn't live near him anymore. Throughout the short conversation, Macy made it clear that caring for her grandfather was absolutely impossible for her right now, but Ray wasn't sure how true this was. He'd been keeping tabs on his granddaughter, trying to stay aware of at least a little bit of what was going on in her life. He knew Macy was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in the city in a fairly bad neighborhood. Ray had no idea what Macy was getting herself into, but he got the sense that she was more interested in getting her hands on her inheritance than caring for him in his final days. In fact, the only times he had seen her in recent months was when she needed money. Ray knew the money wasn't going toward anything good, but he couldn't deny the request from his granddaughter. Despite their rough relationship, he wanted to make sure she was safe. But was giving her money really the best plan? Knowing that his days on this earth were numbered, Ray decided that he would spend some of the little time he had left teaching his granddaughter a very valuable lesson. Hopefully, it would help improve her life even after he was gone. Macy spent the next 2 weeks trying to make money any way she could to make her next debt payment. One day, after an exhausting day of running errands for one of the men she owed money to, she got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was about her grandfather, Ray. Ray had passed away the night before in his sleep. He was weak and alone at the time, but comfortable and not in pain. Macy didn't know what to say. The hospice nurse on the phone assured Macy that Ray had already arranged his own cremation, but Macy needed to attend the reading of his will. Macy waited nervously to hear what inheritance her grandfather had left her. She knew Ray wasn't necessarily a rich man, but any money he might have left to her would help aid her in escaping her department. But the notary had a big surprise for her when he read out the will. Ray had left a note listing Macy's conditions to have the inheritance released to her. The notary had been told he had to personally hand the letter over to her. The letter contained a list of companies. These were jobs that Ray had sent Macy's CV to and had asked her to come in for an interview there. Ray wanted to give his granddaughter a chance to work for her money instead of handing it to her, a long-term solution rather than a short-term one. That was his parting gift to her, and a very wise lesson to teach. The note contained a letter from Ray directly addressed to Macy, and it started off with him apologizing for lying to her all of her life. It immediately caught Macy's attention. What could he possibly be talking about? What kind of secrets had Ray kept from her? Ray started that he had hidden a lot about himself while alive. He wanted to tell her about many things, but he wasn't sure how to do it. Now he wanted to tell her everything he could, mainly about the wealth he had garnered during his less than squeaky clean past. According to this letter, Ray had amassed a great fortune in this time, but could never spend it himself due to how he gained it. It would put him on the police radar. But now that he had passed away, he could safely hand the money over to Macy. She was sure that money would answer everything she was going through. But Ray had something very different planned for her. According to the letter, she had to look in the place that had always stayed the same. But seeing as the whole house was taken apart to have Ray continue to live in it, that place might be hard to find. Once she arrived in the basement, she heard the police invading the house. She heard the officers call out, "This is the police! Make yourselves known!" Macy didn't think for a second about making herself known. The police combed the whole house looking for Macy. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard the basement door open. The officer grabbed his phone to call his colleagues. "We can't find her. She probably fled." Macy took a relieved breath as the basement door closed. When she turned on the light in the basement, Macy's mouth fell open in surprise. On the other side of the room lay her grandfather. He was still breathing, but he was on a ventilator. Her grandpa began to laugh, for how far he was still capable of that. He explained he had staged everything. The police were not real. He had hired actors to show her how she had been living lately, hoping she would feel guilty about it. Her grandfather continued his story with the notary public in on the plot. Macy felt the ground sink beneath her feet. How could her grandfather do this? At first she became angry, but after a few minutes she began to see for herself that she had not acted correctly over the past few years. Macy decides to take good care of him during the years her grandfather is still alive. She has learned her lesson.